Good afternoon. I'll start with Buddy Franklin's apology from the AFL yesterday afternoon. I've never seen anything like that in football where you've had a tribunal hearing. There was language used in the tribunal hearing, and the AFL, within hours, stepped on the front foot and apologised in regards to the language of its own legal counsel. They issued a statement yesterday, the AFL, saying there are no cowardly players in the AFL, let alone Lance Franklin. That's referring, of course, to Andrew Woods, the AFL legal counsel, using the word cowardly in the tribunal hearing on Wednesday night. The AFL going on in their statement to say the language, that type of language, should not be part of the AFL tribunal process, and it does not reflect the views of the AFL. I spoke to Andrew Woods, the AFL's legal counsel. He was good enough to take my call offline. He didn't want to speak on record, but in summary, he did explain that he was obviously trying to demonstrate the point in regards to the action and the rule, and in no way said that Buddy is cowardly. I guess the point he was trying to make was that Mr. Cotchin was not reasonably expecting to be struck by Mr. Franklin, and in doing so used the word cowardly. Anyway, it's not for me to defend or promote. It's just reporting what I discussed with Andrew Woods yesterday. He wasn't calling Buddy a coward. He was talking about the rules and the application of that rule, and in particular, the action. I think the Swans certainly didn't think it was a waste of time trying to challenge Buddy's one-week ban. They were certainly of the view that it wasn't intentional, and that was certainly Buddy's view. I think even post-match, I understand Buddy thought, well, he certainly didn't think he hit Cotchin intentionally. Anyway, the crux of it is there's been a big hoo-ha afterwards. The AFL's apologised in an unprecedented step, and Buddy isn't free to play Melbourne. That's, I guess, the key to all this, tomorrow night. Anyway, that's the latest concerning Buddy. Just by way of background, and yesterday, Sydney was very concerned about this, as I reported. They went to the AFL, I think it was Andrew Pridham or Tom Harley, and obviously voiced their concern, and the AFL reacted swiftly. One club president I spoke to this morning said that Tasmania, at the moment, the idea and concept of a new team looks dead in the water. That's because of the stadium. Tasmania has admitted they only gave approximate costings, back of the envelope type stuff, a week before they announced the concept of the stadium. I think the figure they came up with is $750 million. They've admitted now that needs far more work, and the opposition in Tasmania, that's the state opposition in politics, is worried about the cost of the stadium in light of what they've described as a cost of living crisis. There's two aspects to all this. The clubs, the existing clubs, think the stadium is a must. To explain why, well, part of the concept would be you'd build a stadium down there, have it as a closed roof. Tasmania's got pretty bad weather during winter, but you get really high-quality football under the roof, which in the winter you could broadcast, obviously, back into the markets, create a dedicated, perhaps, TV spot Thursday night, Sunday night, Monday night. You could host 11 odd home games down there, and that would be worth real money. Tasmania underlights home team broadcast back into Australia. So a lot of clubs think from an economic standpoint that the stadium is an absolute must, a capital item that Tasmania must contribute as part of this idea. Some of the club presidents were already worried that some political support for Tasmania might erode. For example, in the future, if the Greens Party became the dominant party in Tasmania, they've obviously got a lot of influence down there. Perhaps they wouldn't be as supportive of a football team and expenditure on a football team. If they had an ambulance crisis like we have now in Victoria at the moment, you might want to redivert funds, which might be fair enough in the future, and the funding for the team from the government might erode. Some club presidents were already worried about that. But they thought maybe that this lack of political support might occur in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years' time. It's happened already because the opposition's already worried about the cost of the stadium. Clubs are also worried about the money that Tasmania has offered, which is $15 million per year across 10 years. Several clubs, and even the AFL, don't think that's enough. Just for some context, Tasmania already give $8 to $10 million to Hawthorn and North Melbourne. So in one way, their offer, which is based on the Colin Carter report, which is the AFL's own report, is not really a lot more incrementally than what they're already tipping in by way of sponsorship to Hawthorn and North. Anyway, what I've done this week is gone and spoken to Brett Godfrey and Grant O'Brien, two business heavyweights that are behind Tasmania's push, that are on the Tasmanian task force. They're immensely passionate about this project and very confident in their projections. And I did ask the task force whether it's fair to approve a team, that is, the clubs approve a team, at a time when a lot of clubs like Collingwood and Hawthorn and West Coast don't even get their full salary cap paid.
Well, look, I don't think that's valid either, because at the end of the day, Tasmania's not coming and seeking a free hit out of this. Tasmania will generate that. If you just look at the current broadcast deal, not the one that they're looking at, and everyone understands that the premium content deal is likely to be better than the last one. The average that each club, for the 11 games that we would offer into the market, 1 extra round and 3 extra games, would generate $19 million worth of revenue based on today's broadcast deal.
That was Brett Godfrey. He's on the task force. He's a Virgin fame. He's a super businessman, and he's very, very passionate about their costings and is very confident in that regard. Grant O'Brien's done a lot of work on the model, the Green Bay model that Alistair Clarkson's been looking at, not in terms of private ownership, which I floated on this podcast, but a form of private ownership, effectively like private membership. And this is how he explained the concept that Alistair Clarkson's been working on, and they're now trying to pitch into the deal.
The NFL is a competition where the teams, with the exception of Green Bay, are all owned by wealthy individuals. Green Bay is in effect owned by its community. And that drew our attention immediately, because we think Tassie, as much or even more so than any other club, is going to be a community club, supported and owned by its members.
That was Grant addressing some of the Green Bay aspects to the plan and what Alistair Clarkson's been putting together in the background, which is effectively like a whole bunch of an opportunity, if you like, to contribute membership, but in this case, ownership to the club. And that would also help them raise capital at various times. And he pointed to the fact that Green Bay at various times have called upon a capital round and it's been oversubscribed, and there's been lots of people willing to contribute. I should add that Brett did say that private equity is difficult to work in the AFL, because the AFL, their dividend to the clubs is discretionary, and it's hard to build a business model and a private one around that type of thing. Clubs also concerned about the talent aspect. I think there'll be a lot of rigorous discussion regarding Tasmania, even in the media this weekend, as I think the debate behind the scenes heats up. But the big issue now is the stadium, and if that can't get up, I think the whole concept, unfortunately for advocates of Tasmania, is looking very, very shaky indeed. I don't think the Giants are in any rush regarding their coaching search at the moment. I think some of their executives have taken a break this week in light of the bye, which is pretty normal. Adam Uze's name has come up on my radar, being linked to potential interest from the Giants, but it's very, very early in that process. In terms of the race for Gil McLaughlin's job, I mentioned there's some club support or tentative club support the other day for Tom Harley from the Sydney Football Club. I think there's a lot of internal support at the AFL for Andrew Dillon. And I think some of the clubs now are working out, look, this is a commission decision, and it's Richard Goyder, the commission chairman's decision. But I think some of the clubs are just sort of considering how much they want to push an external candidate, someone from outside the AFL. It's certainly the view of some clubs that the candidate should come from outside the AFL pool of candidates. That is, the guys that currently work at the AFL. An interesting one yesterday, St Kilda is on the verge, if they haven't already, of starting contract talks with Brett Ratten. Rats is enormously popular, but Nick Riewoldt spoke candidly yesterday and said that the club is duty-bound, in effect, to at least sound out Clarko before re-signing Brett Ratten. So it's an interesting one, just from, a governance perspective. He's saying, well, just at least go and sound him out before you re-sign Rats. I know there's a lot of support for Rats at St Kilda from David Rath and obviously Simon Lethlean, and I think it's highly likely that it'll be re-signed in the next month or 8 weeks or so. But Nick Riewoldt put that on the agenda yesterday. The Swans had its Hall of Fame function in Melbourne last night ahead of their game this weekend against Melbourne. Darren Cresswell was inducted. He gave an emotional speech in particular, speaking about his battle with gambling. I don't know if the Swans will make that particular section of the speech available. I know that he spoke post-function. But, of course, Cresswell played 244 games for the Swans, including the famous 1996 grand final appearance when Plugger put them into the grand final. But he did speak about gambling and explain the parallels in his view between playing footy, going for the next contest, getting the next rush, getting the next ball, and his terrible addiction with gambling, which has cost him a huge deal. And it was a very candid speech last night that he gave at that function. He got a very warm response, including from some of his former teammates, including Michael O'Loughlin. Now, speaking of Michael O'Loughlin, they inducted 8 Bloods legends, including Tony Lockett, Roy Gazali, and Laurie Nash. But Diesel, Greg Williams, Gerard Healy, Brett Kirk, Michael O'Loughlin, and Barry Round were all there last night in person and on the stage. I had the privilege of interviewing them. It was fantastic listening to some of the old war stories from the early 80s and the late 80s, the flamboyant late 80s, and obviously the success of Mickey O and Brett Kirk It was a really fantastic night. There is a push now, and there will be in the background from Sydney, to join up with Geelong and Carlton and push for Diesel. That's Greg Williams to become an AFL legend. So that's certainly on their radar going forward. Thanks so much for joining our podcast this week. It's been a busy news week. Looking forward to the footy this weekend. Obviously, tune in to Triple M. It all starts tonight. The Bulldogs and Geelong. That's a Friday night blockbuster. It's interesting. It's at Marvel. Gary Owen's back for the Cats. The Bulldogs have been in, I think, improved form. So I'm looking forward to that game. Adelaide taking on West Coast tomorrow. Hopefully West Coast shows something. The Suns obviously take on North. Another important game for Stuart Dew. They should easily knock off North Melbourne. We'll see. Sydney and Melbourne's a great game tomorrow night. Of course, the Swans without Buddy Franklin, but Melbourne get back Langdon, who's vitally important in my view. Melbourne have also made a few changes, dropping the likes of Bedford and Wiedemann. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. You'd think Melbourne would respond after their very uncharacteristic loss last week. This is a beauty on Sunday. Collingwood coming off huge wins against Fremantle and Carlton, taking on Hawthorn, who let their colours down a little bit last week in Darwin. Uncharacteristically young side. They've been up and down. Hawthorn's just likely to bounce back on Sunday and really put a huge fight to the Pies. So I'm looking forward to that. And perhaps the match of the round from a footy perspective, I know tonight's good, is Fremantle and Brisbane on Sunday afternoon. That's an absolute beauty. Fremantle beginning to look like genuine premiership contenders off the back of beating Melbourne up against Brisbane, who are right in it as well. Triple M rocks football. Thanks so much for joining us this week.